40,000 acres were burned at that time, and 1,600 people were displaced, including Wilderness Ridge. The house that we lived in was destroyed. Total devastation of not only property, but, our lives.
I'm Paul Hastings, and you're listening to Compelled. Real people telling true stories of God's compelling love working in their lives. I'll tell you more about Compelled and share a sneak preview of our next episode right after our story. Today, you'll hear from Ron Hunt, the former director of Camp Wilderness Ridge, and a man whose life has been marked by relentless service to the Lord. Ron has faced a multitude of trials throughout his life, yet, as you'll hear, he's remained steadfast in his faith, and God continues to work through him. We hope you'll be blessed by his story. All right, well, today I'm here with Ron Hunt from Camp Wilderness Ridge. And Ron, I have known you for many years, actually. I was thinking about this earlier today, and I think I've known you for close to either 15 or 16 years. And it's just a real pleasure to be sitting here and asking you questions. For those that are listening, can you just tell a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself?
My testimony is that I didn't really come to Christ till I was 35. However, I went to church every Sunday and was involved in lots of different activities in the church and leadership roles with adults. Of course, I was a young adult at that point, and with young couples, with my wife Sandy, and all those things. But I didn't. It was only 35 when I really came to understand that I never had a relationship with Jesus Christ.
Can you tell us more about that?
Well, I started. Yeah, I had my own business at that time. My business was going very well, and my family was going very well, and my life is going very well. And so, unlike a lot of people that come to Christ because they're in the depths, I was like, is this all there is? Because
Wow.
I was really looking around and saying, I've kind of arrived at where I wanted to go, and it didn't have any real satisfaction. So I started trying to understand, what did I believe as a Christian? I connected with two friends I had, one who I'd gone to school with, and he invited me to go be a part of Bible study fellowship.
Yeah.
And the other gentleman was Joe, and he was doing Bible studies in his home. So I got involved in both of those. And then one Saturday morning, Joe came over and asked me if I wanted to go take a ride. And so we did. And he presented the 4 spiritual laws handout to me. And I realized at that moment, God opened my eyes that I didn't know him.
Wow.
And that's when my life completely changed.
Interesting. Tell me about your family, your children.
Well, I have we're blessed with 4 children. The first part of our children's lives were blessings, that Sandy and I would talk from time to time. We've been really blessed, no real illnesses or injuries. And then we started to experience some challenges. Our son, Brian, who was our oldest son, we caught him on his birthday sneaking out of the house and realizing that he'd been doing that for a while, and then started to recognize there was some drug use going on there, and it just was a huge impact on all our family. He ran away on several occasions. He had gotten involved in heroin, which is, very difficult to get off. And he died of a drug overdose on his birthday, on his 26th birthday.
Oh, wow.
Heroin's a terrible, terrible death. It's because your body shuts down, and if somebody's not around you at that time to wake you up, you just stop breathing. And that was in 2000. the year 2000. And then in 2001, our son Jeff had just finished doing summer internship at our church, and he started feeling sick. So they took him, had him go down to the hospital and run some tests. And the test showed up some things that were they weren't sure about, so they went ahead and admitted him to the hospital. But basically, by that evening, they started talking about leukemia. And we had at our church one family that very close to us, that the mother had been diagnosed with leukemia, and about 3 years later passed away.
And how old was Jeff at this time?
He was 19.
19 and diagnosed with leukemia.
As it progressed, they gave him some chemo, and what was collecting on the outside of his lungs was white blood cells, and so he was starting to suffocate. As they gave him this medication, then it started killing those cells, and it was collecting fluid in there. So they cut him open on his side, and this was just in his regular hospital room, and started to drain that out. Well, the doctor, I was standing in the room, and the doctor was collecting this in this container, and the next thing I know, he's yelling at the nurse to get another one. He was losing blood faster than they could put him in, and they had put him into ICU. And so I had a really close friend that was an elder, and let them know that I'd like for them to come pray for him. And we saw the first miracle. The elders came and anointed him with oil and prayed for him, and that became under control. So he was very, obviously losing blood faster you can put it in is not some way you're going to live very long.
Wow.
Just saw God moving in that. And I think part of it is the devastation was losing our other son. And so God wanted to assure us that he was in control of this situation.
Yeah.
He was diagnosed the 1st of August, went home on the 11th of September, as I mentioned, and they had a donor within a couple of months, which they had prepared us that could take a year. This was on 9/11/2001.
Oh, wow.
We find out that the man that met all the criteria for being the donor was in the Army Reserve, and he had been called up, and he was identified, and they were able to contact him within a couple of days of him having the required injections to go overseas like that. Well, the moment he would have had that, he would have been disqualified.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
So they were able to get the permission for him to be delayed on having that happen so that he could give the bone marrow to us. So he had his bone marrow transplant on December 7th of 2001. So it's been 17 years. The clinic in San Antonio where this took place is going to be celebrating their 25th anniversary in August. And they've contacted him about being one of the featured kind of poster boys.
Wow.
And for that event. And the doctor that Dr. Shaughnessy was his doctor, Jeff is the longest living patient he has.
What did this do for you and your wife, Sandy, and especially to your faith, watching one son tragically die and then a year later having another son diagnosed with a very deadly condition?
We didn't dwell on some of it because there was just things were happening so fast.
Yeah.
We praise God for the fact that he had brought us to Hill Country Bible Church, and we were truly a part of the Hill Country Bible Church family. People were coming and mowing our lawn. People were coming and picking up our laundry every 2 or 3 days. So we had all those logistics, and people were taking care of us. And and just being, loving on us and caring for us.
It's amazing to see how God's body comes together in such a special way at moments like that. And thanks for sharing that. Let's transition over to Camp Wilderness Ridge. We had mentioned earlier at the beginning of this interview that you were the former camp director at Camp Wilderness Ridge. Can you tell us how you first got connected with the camp?
Well, I became aware of Wilderness Ridge. I had a good friend. His name was Neil Carnegie. Neil had told me about the camp, and then one day he started talking to me about that there was a camp director position open, and invited me to consider it. So we went out there and toured the facilities and saw the camp director's home that they had built, and started praying about it. We had always talked about doing, something like hospitality in our latter years. Sandy and I we had the experience of working with kids, because we'd had 4 children and we'd homeschooled a couple of them, and so we had a kind of a revolving door at our house. So definitely felt God was calling us.
Tell us about the mission and purpose of Camp Wilderness Ridge. What makes it unique from other Christian camps?
I asked a similar question when I first came. I said, what is how would you state what the purpose is? And a lady named Betty Kleckty, her husband was very instrumental in starting the camp. He was deceased, so I didn't get a chance to meet him, but she said he would say to lead boys to Christ. And so that really stuck with me, because it struck me. It wasn't just presenting the gospel to somebody and them coming to faith, but you're always leading them to Christ. In Matthew 28:18-20, it's very specific about, and make disciples that learn how to follow what I've commanded you.
Yeah.
And so it's an ongoing thing.
Let me ask you this. So Wilderness Ridge has been around for over 30 years. I know that in the last, 13 years, you've been involved at the camp. But in just the last handful of years, some really tough times have happened to the camp. Could you kind of share about those experiences?
Yes, I'd be glad to. God has put some challenges in front of us. It started in 2011 on Labor Day weekend. On a Sunday, a fire started. I think it was maybe 5 miles away from Wilderness Ridge. I got the phone call, and we were in Arlington, in Austin, and it was an hour drive from where we were back to the camp. And by the time we got back to the camp, we couldn't get to the camp itself because the fire had already jumped over the highway. And that was, in less than an hour, they'd probably gone 2 miles. So it was moving very, very rapidly. By the next morning, the Wilderness Ridge was completely destroyed.
Wow, and that's 100 acres of prime timber.
Incredibly beautiful, and just pristine in every aspect. And it was a perfect camping site because it had these ravines that guys could play and make up all kinds of exciting adventures through, and it was just an incredibly beautiful place. And so the loss is not only Wilderness Ridge, but all of us that ever have been through that forest and had seen how beautiful it was and how devastated it's been. And so, almost 40,000 acres were burned at that time, and 1,600 people were displaced, and including Wilderness Ridge. The house that we lived in was destroyed. Total devastation of not only property, but, our lives.
So how did the camp begin to recover at that point?
We were able to find property just 2 miles away, and that had been a camp, not a summer camp, but a rustic camping environment that we were able to make arrangements to to start to utilize and be able to build out the structures we needed. It already had a commercial kitchen, so uh, by the next summer we were able to be established so that we could uh, do summer camp once again. And being just 2 miles away from our other property, which had a lake on it, we were able to uh, transport the guys back and forth to be able to take advantage in doing the canoeing and fishing and activities like that. We had volunteers that were coming and coming and coming, and some would come and say, "We're going to build this cabin," and we're going to build this cabin, and it gets done. And I could go back and recall many stories where you can certainly see God's provision.
And this is what year at this point?
This is 2015, and another fire has started in the area. Now, it was east of us. It was kind of northeast of us where it started, and it was going south, and it had stayed on a pretty much just direct south. So it was parallel to the camp, and so we had no reason at that point to be concerned at all about that fire. But the winds changed and brought it right back up and right across our new property and destroyed everything. And of course, at that point, we had 3 families living on that property and staff people, and so their homes were destroyed. One of them had only been married about 60 days.
Wow.
So they lost everything. But to make matters worse, it also went down and went through our old property again and destroyed all the trees, which were up about 10 to 12 feet at that point.
All the trees that had been replanted.
We'd work with the Texas Forestry, and we planted over 30,000 trees. And so that property was gone too. I mean, because it really charred the soil a lot more than it did the first time. So we didn't have any place at that point, so we started looking for land in the area.
What was it like being the camp director at Wilderness Ridge, where so many boys for so many years had come and made lifelong memories there, and many had found Christ there, but then watching the camp just completely be burned down to the ground, not once, but twice over the course of just 4 years. What was that like for you?
Well, it was hard all of the times. As I said, the fact was that there was a natural beauty there that we couldn't replace. God created it, and God would have to create it again. And it really set me back. How do where are we going with this? What's God really teaching us, and how do we go forward? And as the 2015 fire was happening, I'd already stepped down as the executive director. I was still involved. I was going to stay involved with the camp, but I didn't have that full responsibility. And
you had also had open heart surgery recently as well. Is that correct?
Right. And I'd been diagnosed with bladder cancer, which is gone and today, and my heart's doing fine.
Praise God.
So God's in all of it, and so it's just it's big disruption and the continuity of the camp. Obviously, it's just the biggest challenge we have with all of that is keeping in mind that we're striving to be low cost, and so we hit that just put another huge pressure on us as we might try to find another place, and recognizing the places we're looking were just raw land. I mean, literally no electricity even to them, or water or things. So there was all of those lead times after we found a place that would have to be taken care of before we could ever start to have the camp. Having all those lead times to overcome, we started looking at alternatives, and one of the alternatives was to work with to turn all our assets over to a camp that was established. And so we chose to go with Forest Glen Camps, who's headquartered in Huntsville, Texas. They have 2 camps there. And then they also have a camp in Rosebud, Texas. And Rosebud, Texas camp is the one that we're occupying now. But we've built that out, and we have a Wilderness Ridge section to that so that when we're in session, we're completely isolated from any other group that might be there doing their camp activities. I have a beautiful 13-acre spring-fed lake.
Wow.
And so it's a wonderful environment, and God's given us a great opportunity. And so that's where we are today and moving forward. And we had summer camp last year, and we start in about 3 weeks with our second year of operation.
You and I were talking on the phone just a few weeks ago, and you were mentioning how, all these things have happened. And I believe you mentioned that. How old are you now, Ron?
I'm 71.
You're 71. But on the phone, you mentioned that, God still hasn't finished with you yet, and that you believe that, however God is calling you to still work within his kingdom, that you're still ready and willing to go wherever he sends. Can you tell us a little bit about the mission trip that you just came back from back in November?
Yes, I was privileged enough to go to India. We were up in the mountains. We would go out each day. We being a group of 8 of us, we would have a translator, and we would also have a representative of the local church. So we went into a village, and we would go from house to house. We would talk with them. Most of them were Hindu, so that meant they had lots of gods. So as you started presenting Jesus Christ, they would you could see that they could recognize and understand that, but you could also recognize they were kind of going in the direction of, well, we can just put that on the shelf with all the other gods.
Add him to the pantheon.
Yeah, and so so we would go into more detail about, Jesus is the only way to God. And we had 85 accept Christ during about 8 days that we were there.
Ron, I'm a younger guy, as you know, and when I think of someone that's lived out their life in service to God's kingdom, I think of you. What kind of advice would you give to Christians about living faithfully for Jesus?
When you look at Scripture, especially Paul is always talking about going forward. Keep your eyes on the prize.
Yeah.
So the first thing you need to do is not be looking back and evaluating what you didn't do.
Yeah.
Is where am I going from? What am I going to do right now going forward? And the next critical part is that my job is to share the faith. There again, I go back to Matthew 28, 18 through 20, because it just sums it all up. Jesus says, first of all, he tells you he has all the authority. And he ends that by saying, and I'll always be with you. And we need to remember, God is always with us. And he's with you right now. And so you've got the encouragement that you've got the all-powerful, because you got all authority, and that he's with you all the time. And what does he want you to do? He wants you to go tell other people about who God is and to disciple them. I encourage people that as they get into the retirement years, and I read a statistic yesterday, there's 35 million people in the United States that are 65 years of age or older. The interesting part is that that group we want to call teenagers, there's only 23 million. So
oh, wow.
We outnumber them.
The seniors outnumber the young adults is what you're saying.
Right. I mean, we always talk about how this generation is our future, but we need to understand we're the one that are shaping that future.
The seniors.
Yeah, seniors are, and if we go sit on the bench, all we're doing is what? Demonstrating sitting on the bench. If we're still actively pursuing life with gusto, then they're going to pursue life with gusto. They're going to have a life that's worthwhile when it's all encased with a faith in Jesus Christ.
That's great. For those that are listening and that might live in the Texas area or Texas vicinity, and they want to learn more about Camp Wilderness Ridge, either how to volunteer or send their sons there, where can they go for more information?
They can go to forestglen.org//Wilderness Ridge.
forestglen.org/Wilderness Ridge.
Right.
Great. All right. Well, Ron, thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day this morning to just share and hopefully invest in the lives of young people that are listening, but also older folks that are listening as well.
Oh, I hope so. For all, and to God's glory.
All right. Thanks for being on the show.
My pleasure.
It's encouraging to hear how God has preserved Ron and kept his faith intact even through many difficult circumstances. And God continues to use Ron through the ministry of Camp Wilderness Ridge and his testimony. You can learn more about Wilderness Ridge at their website. And just so you know, Ron emailed me last week to clarify that they have a new web address. It's forestglenwildernessridge.com. Again, that's forestglenwildernessridge.com. We launched our podcast last week, and the response was overwhelming. So thank you everyone who listened to our episodes and shared them. We appreciate you guys. You can find all of our episodes and more at our website, compelledpodcast.com. You can also hear our episodes by subscribing to Compelled on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Overcast, or Pocket Cast. If you enjoyed our show, then we'd super appreciate it if you'd leave us a review and a 5-star rating on iTunes. Also, consider sharing this episode with others that would be blessed by Ron's story. Our show was edited by Zach Fowler, who is a gifted film editor, visual effects artist, and storyteller. You can find Zach and his work at zachfowlerimagery.com. Our logo was designed by Josiah Jost, an incredibly talented logo designer. You can reach Josiah and view his work at sidedesign.com. Our website was created by Ben Billups, a digital developer extraordinaire. You can follow Ben on Instagram at ben.billups. Special thanks to my wife, Sarah Hastings, for helping make this project a reality. Without her, this podcast wouldn't exist. And that's it for this episode. Stick around after the music for a sneak peek at our next episode. I'm your host, Paul Hastings, and you've been listening to Compelled. We'll see you next Tuesday.
Turned to the Lord and said, God, I am scared. I'm not going to live through this night. I'm terrified. I don't want to go to hell. My life is a wreck. I feel like there's no hope for me. And at that point, a light didn't shine out of heaven. I did not hear an audible voice, but I really do believe I sensed the presence of God and His Spirit speaking to me and essentially telling me something I'd heard preached growing up many times. It just didn't sink in.